Nariyuki was a handsome but ugly broke student that gets no hose, no plate, and no money. However, his life turned around when he's offered a dream scholarship in exchange for tutoring the dumbest popular girls in school so they can pass their exams, but they end up falling in love with his sausage instead. One fateful day, Nariyuki was called to the headmaster's office, and when he got there, the headmaster told him he would give him the special VIP recommendation. Nariyuki was beyond excited after hearing this, because getting that recommendation meant he could get into any affiliated university and all his tuition would be covered. However, his excitement was short-lived when the man said the recommendation came with a condition. The next moment, the door was opened and there stood Rizu and Fumino, the school's very own Albert Einstein and William Shakespeare. Rizu was like a supercomputer and could solve calculation questions in the blink of an eye, while Fumino's essays were so perfect that they always brought her teachers to tears. In other words, both girls were natural-born geniuses, unlike Nariyuki, who had to study day and night to maintain his grades. That was why he was surprised when the headmaster told him he would tutor both girls from that day and help them get into the university of their choice. After leaving the headmaster's office, Nariyuki and the girls went to a nearby park to get acquainted. During their discussion, he learned that all their tutors had given up on them, making them skeptical about him. He'd assured them he wouldn't abandon them since his recommendation was on the line, and then asked which universities they wanted to apply to. Rizu replied that she wanted to apply to one that offered liberal arts, while Fumino expressed her interest in a university that offered science. This shocked him, as what they wanted was the exact opposite of their field of expertise. However, since they were geniuses, he'd assumed it would be a walk in the park for them. He gave them past questions to work on to test their understanding of their preferred courses. This exercise didn't last up to a minute, because both girls dropped their pens and admitted they didn't understand what they were looking at. It was then he realized that even though the girls were geniuses, they were nearly as clueless as Luffy when it came to answering questions related to their chosen courses. It also made the dumb idiot feel like he was some sort of messiah sent to deliver them, so he decided to give them an assignment. He asked them to review the questions that night, as he would test them the next day. Unfortunately, the girls performed poorly on the test he gave them the next day, so he gave them another test the day after, and they still flunked the tests. The worst part was he tested them for an entire week, and every day their scores only went up by 1 point. Their unending failure nearly drove him mad, as he couldn't understand why they kept failing. Fumino felt ashamed of herself, but Rizu was too prideful and blamed her failure on the test, saying something was wrong with it. Realizing that he had his work cut out, Nariyuki asked them to bring out their workbooks and suggested that they tutor each other, since they were both experts in the field the other wanted to study. However, the girls told him it would be impossible because they were bad teachers. Since there was no other solution, Nariyuki advised the girls to pursue courses in their fields of expertise. This annoyed Rizu, and she accused him of being like their other tutors, who saw them as hopeless cases. She expressed frustration at people telling her how she ought to live her life because she was gifted. When she ran off, Rizu went after her, leaving behind their workbooks and a very confused Nariyuki. That night, as Nariyuki sat at his table, he decided he'd speak to girls again and try to convince them to study courses they were good at. However, he had a change of heart when he flipped through their workbooks and saw how much work they had put into studying. It made him remember how his father used to tell him that as long as he kept trying, he could get better at the things he wasn't good at. The next morning, he returned the workbooks to the girls and apologized for how things went down the previous day. They accepted his apology and turned to leave, but he stopped them and produced 2 notebooks, which he handed to each girl from his bag. Curious, the girls flipped through the book and were surprised to see they were filled with advisory notes for them. This made them realize that he wasn't just another synonym for Sakura, so they asked why he'd gone through all that trouble for them. Nariyuki replied that it was because he knew what it was like to fail at something he didn't understand. He promised to dedicate his time to teaching them and begged them to stick by his side. Later that day, they went to the library for another tutoring session, and while the girls worked on their tasks, Nariyuki worked on his assignments. A sleepy Fumino suddenly put her head on his shoulder, causing him to freak out. His unmanly shriek woke Fumino up, and she quickly apologized as she moved away. Nariyuki told her it was okay, even though he struggled to keep his little head down since her smell had assaulted his senses. The next moment, Rizu called his attention to ask for assistance with a question. When he turned to look at her book, she leaned into him, causing her plots to press against his arm. Immediately he panicked and pulled away before answering her question, since the feeling of her melons was overwhelming him. He tried to steady his heart, which was galloping faster than a horse, but he couldn't because the girls turned their attention to him, making it go faster. Fortunately, he managed to get through the rest of the tutoring session without creaming his pants. Risu was the first to leave because she had to go help out at her family's udon restaurant, so Narayuki and Fumino walked home together. On their way, Fumino lamented about her failure on the last test he gave them earlier that day, but he assured her that with time she would improve, making her happy. After she declared that she would give it her all, he noticed she didn't continue walking, as all her attention was on the stars above. Out of curiosity, he asked if she liked stars, and she said she did. She further explained that her love for stars was born when she was a little girl, hoping to locate her late mother's star. She shared that her love for stars was why she wanted to study astronomy. Admittedly, she knew she was bad at science, but that wouldn't stop her from following her dreams. Realizing that she'd said too much, she begged Narayuki not to pay attention to anything she said, but he told her that he would help her achieve her dreams. Surprised by his response, she asked if he was making a promise, and he said yes. After they parted ways, Narayuki walked by a park and was surprised to see Risu playing cards thereafter returning from a delivery. Since he wasn't hurrying to get home, he asked if he could play with her, and Risu said yes. During the game, Risu shared that she wanted to study psychology to understand human emotions better. This helped Narayuki understand that just like Fumino, Risu was working towards an end goal. A few days later, Narayuki stopped by the headmaster's office to give him a report on how Risu and Fumino's tutoring sessions were going. When he was finished, the man informed him that he was getting another student added to his tutoring roster. This student was part of the swimming team and was nicknamed the Simmering Ebony Mermaid Princess. Narayuki knew who the headmaster was talking about very well, as he had been friends with her since they were children. Her name was Uruka, and she was a certified dullard in academics. More than anything, Narayuki wanted to refuse the headmaster's request to tutor Uruka, but his recommendation was on the line, so he agreed. After school, he met Uruka at the swimming pool where she was practicing. When Uruka spotted him standing by the side of the pool like a forgotten piece of furniture, she asked if he dropped by to ogle her low-budget Kardashian body. Narayuki assured her he wasn't there for that reason, and said he'd come to inform her that he was her new tutor. Uruka told him she didn't need a tutor since she was getting a sports recommendation for the university she wished to attend. The recommendation was similar to the one Narayuki was getting, so she didn't have to take the entrance exam. Narayuki then told her that the new criteria for getting that recommendation included having an average score on all tests, especially in English. Uruka was shocked after hearing this and immediately ran away, screaming that she didn't want to study, but Narayuki followed her. He chased her until he slipped on the wet floor and fell into the swimming pool. Since he was an aquaman, he almost drowned and had to be saved by Uruka. Just then, Risu and Fumino came looking for Narayuki because someone had told them he was there. When they eventually spotted Narayuki, he was straddling Uruka, who was begging him to let go of her. Their compromising position and Narayuki's behavior pushed the girls to assume the worst, so Fumino hit him on the back of the head with a fire extinguisher. Immediately, he jumped up and demanded to know why she was trying to destroy his brain box. Fumino replied with some incoherent words while Risu called a dirty, cultured scumbag. She even looked at him like he was worse than filth, making him realize what the girls were thinking. He tried to defend himself but was cut off by Uruka, who finally noticed that Fumino and Risu were standing before her. First, she asked how a bottom-tier loser like him knew their school's most popular geniuses. The girls were the ones who responded, and after they explained that Narayuki was their tutor, Uruka announced that she was also his student, which surprised him. The next day, Risu was told by her teacher that she had only one day left to turn in her essay or he'd give her a failing grade. Having no choice, Risu went to Narayuki's house to ask for his help with the easy. She even brought him some udon, which Narayuki realized was a bribe after he'd eaten it. He then offered to teach her the fundamentals, so she could know what to write. Before they could begin, Rizu's phone vibrated with a message from Uruka, asking her to join her for karaoke. Rizu replied that she wasn't coming because she was studying at Narayuki's place. Suddenly, they heard a loud sound coming from outside, and the next moment, Uruka flung the door open. She claimed she'd come so Narayuki could help her with an assignment, but Rizu reminded her that until a second ago, she was at a karaoke bar. To keep her from saying anything else, Uruka squeezed her melons, shocking Rizu and Nariyuki. After she emptied the contents of her bag and discovered that she didn't have a single textbook inside it, Nariyuki offered to lend her his. However, when he stood up to get it, a power outage occurred, and for some reason, Uruka was happy about it. Rizu, on the other hand, was scared of the dark but tried to act as if she wasn't. The moment the batteries of their phones died, Rizu practically stuck to Nariyuki's side like glue. When Uruka noticed Rizu clinging to Nariyuki, she suddenly got the brilliant idea to do the same, using the fear of the dark as an excuse. Nariyuki was surprised because he knew Uruka wasn't scared of the dark, but he also wasn't sure what brought on her behavior. He then told both girls not to worry and created a makeshift candle using salad oil, tissues, and aluminium foil. Uruka was impressed by his DIY skills, so the idiot bragged about how it was normal for him not to have power, making her feel bad that he was an underprivileged church rat. When Rizu said the candle reminded her of a birthday, Nariyuki got serious and started dropping some words of wisdom, like he was Master Ugwe. Some of the things he said stirred something inside Rizu, but she kept it to herself because she had to protect her reputation as tsundere. The next moment, Uruka accidentally puts out the candle, causing Nariyuki to begin searching for the lighter. However, since it was dark and he couldn't remember the exact spot where he left the lighter, his hands grabbed things they weren't supposed to. Suddenly, the lights came back on, and both girls were lying on the floor with matching traumatized looks. It took the clueless New a few seconds to realize what he'd done, and when he tried to apologize, Rizu insulted him. Eventually, he was made to face the wall with a sign on his back stating that he was cultured. The girls also faced opposite directions because they were embarrassed. When no one said anything for a while, Nariyuki suggested they resume studying, but Rizu said she was going home, shocking him. The next morning, Nariyuki asked Rizu about her essay, and she told him that she'd turned it in, which surprised him. He asked how she'd figured out how to write it, and she said it was because of something he said. Nariyuki couldn't remember saying anything meaningful, but accepted her thanks anyway. After school that day, Uruka begged Nariyuki to help her study for her English test. She had just learned that if she failed the test, she would have to take a supplementary class, which would interfere with her swimming practice. Nariyuki suggested that she memorize the words, but Uruka rejected the idea because her memory was almost as bad as Dory's. Nariyuki told her she had to be patient and advised her to keep repeating the words until they stuck. Since Rizu and Fumino were with them, they offered to help her and Uruka thanked them. After they studied for a while, Uruka begged them to let her stop, stating that she was tired. As far as she was concerned, studying was a waste of time since it wasn't fun. This made him remind her that when she began swimming, she didn't find it fun, but after she started putting in the work and breaking her records, she began enjoying it. Uruka agreed with him but pointed out that it was creepy that he knew those facts about her. He told her it was because the only time she's ever focused was when she was swimming. As soon as he said this, the muses gave him an idea. The next day, he incorporated swimming into Uruka's study sessions, and surprisingly, she got every question right. On their way home later, Nariyuki advised Uruka to keep reviewing the tests independently so she wouldn't forget them. Uruka told him that she would, and to thank him for helping her, she gave him a gift. When he got home later, he checked the bag to see what she'd given him and discovered it was her wet swimsuit. At the same time at Uruka's, she discovered that she'd given Nariyuki the wrong bag and felt embarrassed. A few days later, Nariyuki was informed by the headmaster that Fumino and Rizu had to get an average score or higher on their upcoming tests. He said that Nariyuki would have to convince them to change their intended field of study if they didn't produce those scores. After he left the headmaster's office, Rizu and Fumino saw him and tried to get his attention, but stopped when they overheard Sensei Kurisu and the headmaster talking. Kurisu stated that Nariyuki was foolish for not dissuading the girls from their intended field of study. She also told the principal to relieve Nariyuki of his duties if the girls failed to produce results after the midterms. The girls felt bad after hearing this, and their mood didn't improve when they met Uruka and Nariyuki for their tutoring session. When Uruka asked what the problem was, Fumino told her everything was fine and tried to act like she was excited about the session. Rizu didn't say anything because Kurisu's words were replaying in her head like it was the album of the year. Eventually, she spoke up and asked Nariyuki if he could come to her place that weekend to supervise her studying, to which he responded yes. On Sunday, Nariyuki showed up at Rizu's place as promised, but felt uncomfortable since she wanted to have the study session at her family's restaurant. Her father made him more uncomfortable by threatening to chop his sausage if he tried to put moods on his daughter. Fortunately, Rizu intervened and saved him from her father, after which they began studying. Hours later, they finished, and Naruyuki tried to leave, but Rizu stopped him to ask what would happen if she failed the test. Naruyuki told her that if that happened, they would double their efforts to ensure she did better on the next test. The following day, Rizu sat for the test and passed, so she showed it to her surprised friends. Rizu admitted that it was the highest grade she'd ever gotten in a modern Japanese test, causing Naruyuki to shed a few tears because he felt like a proud father. After he calmed down, he said all that was left was for Fumino to ace her test, and Fumino assured him she would do that. Unfortunately, Fumino had a fever, so Naruyuki suggested speaking to the teacher to let her take the test later as a makeup. Fumino refused, saying that if she took the test as a makeup, 20% would be docked from her final grade, and she didn't want that. This made Uruka say that with a bit of rest and some hot food, Fumino would be right as rain. Naruyuki didn't think it would work, but Uruka was sure it would, so he agreed to go to Fumino's house after school to help Uruka nurse her back to health. When he arrived at Fumino's house with the food items Rizu forced him to take, he went to her room and opened the door without waiting for her to invite him in. However, he regretted that decision because Uruka was helping Fumino change clothes, and when they saw him, they called him all sorts of colorful names. Naruyuki quickly closed the door and went to wait in the hallway as he chastised himself for foolishly barging into a girl's bedroom. Not long after, Uruka emerged from the room and said she understood that his hormone monster was working overtime. So she didn't entirely blame him for wanting to unlock his peeping Tom persona. They then went to the kitchen to prepare some porridge with the items Naruyuki brought, but Naruyuki didn't trust Uruka's cooking abilities. Uruka told him not to underestimate her, as she'd learned directly from Sanji himself. Still, Naruyuki remained skeptical, so she asked him to taste it after preparing the meal. One taste of the food had Naruyuki declaring that with her skills, she ought to be the one roasting Gordon Ramsay in the kitchen. Uruka felt proud of herself and tried to brag, but he cut her off to ask why she was dressed like a newly wedded waifu. Hearing those words from Naruyuki made the idiot girl start imagining what life would be like if she married him, since her imagination was the only place she could simp over him in peace. She soon realized that she was being delusional and pushed the images away from her mind. Later, Fumino woke up. Uruka was fast asleep by her bedside, but Naruyuki was awake and going through her notebook. When he was through, he told her she was ready for the test, and Fumino told him it was because he was a good tutor. The next day, she took the test, and just like Rizu, she also aced her test. That master was impressed when he saw the results, but Kurisu, who was starting to give off evil stepmother vibes, said nothing. A few days later, Uruka's teammates took her shopping after swimming practice and tricked her into wearing a pink frilly dress. The worst part is they took her uniform with them, so she had no choice but to walk home wearing the dress. Feeling embarrassed as she walked around town, she prayed she wouldn't run into Naruyuki. Just then, Naruyuki happened to walk by coincidentally, so she told him she wanted to buy a reference book. Naruyuki offered to go with her since he also wanted to buy a book. And while they were in the store, Uruka became 10 times more self-conscious about her looks. She couldn't help but wonder what he thought about her dress, and things got worse when a kid pointed at them, saying they were a couple. Of course, Naruyuki was oblivious to everything happening, which was no surprise since the fool was denser than a brick wall. After leaving the store, they came across a couples-only event, and Naruyuki mentioned that the prize was something his little sister had wanted for a while. Uruka knew Naruyuki couldn't afford to buy the toy since he was almost as broke as her boyfriend, so she proposed that they enter the competition. The competition was a princess carrying tournament, so Naruyuki tried not to drop Uruka. Unfortunately, he didn't have mega knees and was about to call it quits when he noticed Uruka crying. Thinking it was because she was embarrassed by the situation, he pushed himself until they were the last couple standing and won the prize for his sister. On their way home, he'd apologized to Uruka for making her go through something so embarrassing, and she told him she was over it. Feeling a bit more confident, she asked if her dress made her look like a princess, but became embarrassed and ran off when Naruyuki hesitated to respond. That night, after Fumino took a shower, she stepped on the scale to check her weight and screamed when she discovered she'd gained a few pounds. Still in shock about her weight gain, Fumino went to school the next day, wondering what she'd done that led to her gaining weight. However, those thoughts flew right out the window when she walked into her class and was offered some snacks and udon by Risu and Uruka. Midway through her lunch session, she realized what she was doing and panicked. She then asked her friends how they maintained their weight, even though they ate almost as much as Goku. Uruka replied that she had a fast metabolism, and added that all of Risu's nutrition was stored in her Ghibli sacks of meat. Hearing this fueled Fumino's determination to lose some weight, so she decided to go on a diet. Immediately after she decided this, Naruyuki walked in with cheese tarts and offered it to them. Fumino badly wanted the tarts, but she wanted to appear en vogue even more, so she resisted the temptation. Unfortunately, her strong will was tested every day, because her friends brought different types of snacks and food every time they met for their tutoring session. A week later, when it was just her and Naruyuki in the library for their session, Naruyuki asked if she was feeling all right. He pointed out that she hadn't been herself lately, and said he was worried she would fall sick again. Fumino assured him that she was fine, but her stomach betrayed her by growling like a hungry lion. Embarrassed, she explained everything to Naruyuki, who couldn't understand why girls had an obsession with losing weight. He decided to give her some candy since she was hungry, but Fumino dramatically rejected it. Naruyuki tried to convince her that she wasn't fat, but she didn't believe him and insisted that she was. She even went as far as raising her shirt and asking him to touch her stomach, since she was convinced she was on her way to becoming Motomoto. At first, Naruyuki hesitated, but eventually, he realized that might be the only time he would ever get to have skin-to-skin contact with a girl. When he touched her belly, he became mesmerized by how soft it felt. But deep down, he felt he was wading in dangerous waters. That was why when Fumino asked what he thought, he mindlessly muttered the word dangerous, causing the poor girl to assume that he meant that she was dangerously close to being a calorie storage. On her way home, they stopped by the convenience store, and when she came back out, she had bags of snacks with her. This made Naruyuki point out that she'd been complaining about her weight a few hours ago. Fumino told him that those snacks wouldn't make her gain weight. As far as she was concerned, when a person ate while they focused on studying, their brain used up all the sugar, so if she ate her snacks then, she wouldn't gain any weight. Naruyuki was too nice to tell her that she was pretty dumb for someone as gifted as she was, so he compromised and told her to only eat thin noodles whenever she studied. Eventually, her weight returned to normal, and all was right with the world again. A few days later, Risu was harassed by a girl named Sekiho. According to her, Rizu's decision to study liberal arts was a waste of her talents, so it was up to her to stop her. She claimed Risu was being influenced by Naruyuki because she was in love with him, but Risu told her she wasn't that desperate. She then got up to leave and informed Sekiho that she was heading home to study with Naruyuki, making Sekiho think she'd been lying about not having feelings for Naruyuki. Because of this, she followed Risu home and crashed her study session with Naruyuki. Determined to prove that she was right about Risu and Naruyuki's relationship, Sekiho went to sit beside him and began asking him questions. Since all the questions she asked were centered around his love life, this riskless goblin assumed she was trying to hit on him. The funniest part was that he knew he was no Giga Chad, and it was impossible for girls to actually want to sample his cream, but he was also a delusional half-wit who convinced himself that she wanted him. When Sekiho realized what the walking sack of stupidity was thinking, she tried to convince him that she wasn't the least bit attracted to his twig-like body. But Risu interrupted her and kicked both of them out for being too noisy. While they were outside, he'd explained that there was nothing between him and Risu. Sekiho was surprised, as she had truly wanted to believe he was the reason Risu wanted to study something other than science. Naruyuki asked why she cared about what Risu wanted to study, and she mentioned that she wanted to attend the same school as Risu. Naruyuki then told her that if she wanted to befriend Risu, all she had to do was tell her, but Skijo denied it. Just then, Risu came outside to show Naruyuki her work, and he praised her for doing a good job by patting her on the head. Risu blushed, but tried to act like was unaffected by swatting his hand away. However, Skijo noticed. This was enough to convince her that Risu had a crush on Naruyuki, so she made it her duty to crash their study session a few more times, claiming it was a coincidence. The following week, Uruka arrived late at school, and when she wanted to change into her gym clothes, she realized she had left home without putting a bra on. Since there was nothing she could do about it, she put on her jacket, hoping no one would notice the extra jiggles when she walked. During a basketball game, she was so embarrassed because she thought Naruyuki would notice she wasn't wearing any plot shields. Her embarrassment caused her to play badly, so during halftime, Risu and Fumino asked if everything was all right. Uruka told them yes, but when Naruyuki approached them, she became defensive. To her surprise, he asked if she was feeling sick, as she was usually more fired up during any sports event. Uruka assured him that she was fine, so he walked away, saying he couldn't wait for the second half. Fueled by a delusional image of Naruyuki, telling her that everyone was counting on her, Uruka did well in the second half. However, when she attempted to make the final shot, she accidentally collided with Naruyuki, and they fell to the floor in a very compromising position. Uruka wanted the earth to swallow her, and the stupid Naruyuki made it worse by pointing out that he knew she wasn't wearing a bra. Days later, their class went for a 3-day study camp in the mountains. Uruka was excited about the trip, but not the studying aspect of it, while one of Naruyuki's loser friends complained that he would never see the girls taking a bath. Naruyuki ignored the desperate fool because he'd spotted some mountain noodle. It was something his sister liked to cook with, so he tried to pick them, but their teacher pulled him away before he could. Rizu watched as he was being dragged off, but when Fumino asked why she was doing that, she was surprised, as it hadn't occurred to her that she was staring. Unfortunately, this made her become super aware of Naruyuki's presence, and for reasons unknown to her, she became nervous. Realizing she was acting out of character, Rizu left the study room to get a drink from the vending machine. At the vending machine, she struggled to reach the button she needed to press because she wasn't tall enough. Fortunately, Naruyuki showed up and helped her. But since she was mad at him for reasons she didn't understand, she stormed off, saying she needed some fresh air. Outside, she sat by the edge of the forest playing cards as she tried to decipher the reason she was acting the way she was. She knew that she'd been rude to Naruyuki at the vending machine and decided to apologize to him by picking the mountain noodle he wanted badly. Soon after she was done picking them, it began raining, so started heading back to the lodge, but got lost on the way. Back at the lodge, Sekiho asked Naruyuki where Rizu was since she couldn't find her anywhere. So Naruyuki explained that he saw her last by the vending machine, and immediately the thought that she might still be outside crossed his mind. Worried, he went looking for her, and was about to give up when he spotted one of her cards. On the other hand, poor Rizu was huddled up under a tree, hoping the rain would let up soon and she would be found. Suddenly an image of Naruyuki coming to her rescue came to her mind, but she quickly pushed it aside, as it felt stupid. However, she heard his voice calling her name, and when she looked down, she saw him standing there. Surprised, she asked what he was doing there, and he told her that he'd seen one of her cards, so he figured she was close by. He then asked why she was in the forest, and instead of answering his question, she looked at her bag. Naruyuki did the same and excitedly asked if she also liked mountain noodle. Hearing him say the word like caused her to freak out, so she told him he could have the uno if he wanted. Naruyuki thanked her before stretching his hand out for her to take and climb down. Unfortunately, she missed a step and fell directly into Naruyuki's arms. Their lips also met in a very unexpected kiss, leaving both of them feeling very awkward. The next day, they were made to clean the women's bath as punishment for staying out late the previous day. Naruyuki tried to make small talk, but his mind kept returning to the moment of the kiss. Her reaction after the kiss made him wonder if she was mad at him, but he was too scared to bring it up. Eventually, he pushed the thoughts aside and took off his jacket because the place was getting hot. Suddenly, they heard voices, and when they went to check, they saw that their classmates were getting ready to take a bath. Naruyuki was confused as to why they were there because he'd given Rizu the cleaning in progress sign to hang up. When he asked her if she put the sign up as he'd requested, she showed it to him, saying she hung it on her neck. Naruyuki couldn't believe how dim-witted Rizu was, but he tried not to dwell on it because he had much bigger fish to fry. He knew he would lose his credibility if the girls walked in and found him in their bathroom, and that made him panicky. Rizu promised to handle the situation and forced him to hide in the sauna. She then went to speak to the girls and asked them not to go into the sauna because it was too hot. Uruka and Fumino ignored what she said, as they were more interested in why Rizu still had her clothes on in the bath. Before Rizu could react, they stripped her of her clothes and sidestepped her to get to the sauna. Rizu tried to stop them, but they ignored her and went into the sauna. Fortunately, Naruyuki had hidden under one of the benches to avoid being seen, but luck wasn't on his side because it was the same bench the girls sat on. Rizu was also with them because she hoped to convince them to leave, but her mind went blank when thought about how awkward it was sitting above Naruyuki without any clothes on. Eventually, Uruka couldn't stand the heat anymore and ran out of the sauna, but Fumino insisted that she was fine. The next moment, she stepped on Naruyuki's arm, causing her to tell Rizu that something was under the bench. Just as she was about to take a look, Sekiho came in and told them that if they went to the open bath, they could watch a meteor shower. Excited, Fumino dragged Rizu outside with her, and once Sekiho was alone, she told Naruyuki he could come out. Naruyuki asked how she knew he was there, and she explained that she'd seen his jacket lying on the floor outside, so she put two and two together. She then returned his jacket and told him he could sneak out now that the girls were distracted. Naruyuki thanked her and snuck to the door, but the moment he slid it open, he came face to face with Uruka. As if that wasn't bad enough, the towel slid down her body, leaving her exposed for him to see. At that point, Naruyuki was already planning his funeral, but to his surprise, Uruka picked up her towel and walked past him. Immediately, he stepped out of the bath and closed the door behind him, thanking God that his balls weren't going to be cut off that day. Meanwhile, Uruka convinced herself that the Naruyuki was a figment of her imagination since she'd been thinking about him. Later, Rizu called Naruyuki outside and apologized for what happened. After he assured her that he was over it, she brought up their kiss. She asked him to forget it ever happened, stating that it was nothing more than an accidental contact, and he agreed. The week after they returned from their trip, Kurisu Sensei met Naruyuki to discuss the girl's academic progress. Naruyuki felt nervous being in the same room as her because the woman was as cold as ice and didn't smile at all. Before he walked into the room, the girls had warned him about it, but their warning hadn't prepared him enough. As he sat before her, she questioned him about the girls, and he answered as best as he could. However, she suddenly caught him off guard by asking if kissing Rizu was part of his job description. He tried to explain what happened, but she wouldn't listen and told him that he wasn't fit to be a tutor. Just then, Fumino, who had been eavesdropping outside the door, barged into the room. It seemed she'd only heard Kurisu accusing Naruyuki of pulling a ditty, and hadn't heard her mentioning Rizu's name, so she assumed they were talking about her. Immediately, she defended Naruyuki, saying that he was the best tutor she ever had and wanted him to continue being her tutor. Naruyuki felt grateful for what she said until she blurted out that the stomach-touching incident at the library had been her fault. Kurisu's expression changed immediately when she heard this, but she calmly asked Fumino to leave. Not long after that, Rizu and Uruka also showed up separately and tried to defend Naruyuki. Just like Fumino, both girls also accidentally blurted out instances where they were in compromising situations with Naruyuki. Even though the girls swore the incidents had been their fault, Naruyuki thought his pitiful life was over. However, Kurisu surprised him by saying she believed the girls when they said he wasn't a lecherous degenerate. When she got up to leave, he grabbed her hand and asked if it was covered in bruises, because she'd been out in the rain looking for Rizu the day she went missing. He asked this because that was the only explanation as to why she knew about the kiss. Kurisu was surprised. He'd figured that out but refused to say anything, so he suggested that she tell Rizu about it. He said the girls would be glad to know that even though she acted like there was a stick permanently up her ass, she genuinely cared for them. Kurisu told him she couldn't care less what they thought of her, and insisted she'd look for Rizu because she was under her care. When Naruyuki stepped out of the room, the girls rushed to him, asking if he was in the clear and apologizing for the things they said. Naruyuki assured them that all was well and said it was time for them to head to the library for their lessons. The following day before lunch, Naruyuki dropped by the headmaster's office to discuss the girls' recent academic improvements. The man was pleased with the result and praised Naruyuki for doing a good job, causing him to smile like an idiot. The smile didn't leave his face even when he got to his classroom. This prompted his friends to ask if he was grinning like Alice's Cheshire Cat because he'd just returned from a pound session with one of the girls. Naruyuki nearly choked on his onigiri when he heard the question and asked why they were saying such absurd things. He swore that he wasn't involved with any of the girls romantically and they called him a fool, stating that if they were in his shoes, they would have rizzed the girls up and gotten a kiss or two out of them. At the mention of the word kiss, Naruyuki turned beet red, causing them to ask if he'd locked lips with one of the girls. Unable to lie, Naruyuki tried to explain that it was an accident, but they didn't believe him. One of them even ran out of the classroom screaming at the top of his lungs that Naruyuki had betrayed the brotherhood of virgin losers by kissing a girl. Uruka, who had been daydreaming about being with Naruyuki, was shocked when she heard what he said. She kept thinking about it up until the time she met Naruyuki in the library for their tutoring session. When Naruyuki noticed she was distracted, he asked her to get her head out of the clouds. Still, Uruka kept spacing out, as she wasn't sure if she should ask him about the supposed kiss. Eventually, Curiosity got the best of her, and she shyly asked him in English if he kissed someone. Shocked by her sudden question, Naruyuki struggled to form a complete sentence as he tried to explain what happened. Since he did outright say no, she understood that the allegation was true and tried to act like she wasn't hurt by it. She told him she was rooting for him and then ran off, claiming she had practice. She then went up to the courtyard where she sat down feeling depressed. A little while later, Fumino found her sitting there, so she asked if something was wrong. Uruka made up a story about how a friend of hers recently found out that her crush had a girlfriend. Fumino was quick to deduce that she was talking about herself and Naruyuki, but chose not to point it out. However, she advised her to tell her friend not to give up until she confirmed that the boy was truly in a relationship. Uruka was so happy with her advice that she almost hugged her to death. Just then, Rizu arrived and asked the two why they were being overly affectionate with each other. They didn't answer her question, but Uruka let go of Fumino and thanked her for her advice. While she was still speaking, the trio overheard some students talking about Naruyuki's kiss. One of them even said Naruyuki had a girlfriend and had been living with her for 5 years. Fumino tried to convince Uruka that what they were saying was nothing but baseless rumors, but it was pointless. As Uruka walked away from her friends, Fumino noticed that Rizu kept dropping her books, making her wonder if she also had a crush on Naruyuki. The next day, Uruka was in the locker room with her friends and she told them she was curious about Naruyuki's relationship status. The girls suggested that she ask him up front, but Uruka said that would make her look desperate. The girls then said it didn't matter if Naruyuki liked someone because all she had to do was get his attention with her feminine charms. Later after school, as Naruyuki left the school premises, Uruka approached him. He was surprised to see that she had on a much shorter skirt and had popped open her top buttons. As they walked home together, he tried to keep his distance, but Uruka kept moving closer to him, and so the walk became an awkward one. Soon, they arrived at a shrine and decided to offer prayers. While they were praying, it started raining, so they decided to wait until the rain let up. Hoping to make small talk to ease the awkwardness, Naruyuki asked Uruka what she prayed for. She told him she'd prayed that the guy she liked would notice her, which surprised him. After she said this, she fell asleep, so Naruyuki forced himself not to look at her, as it made blood rush to his nether regions. Unknown to him, Uruka was pretending to be asleep because her friends had advised her that it was the quickest way to get Naruyuki's attention. As she lay there, hoping he would make a move, she suddenly felt him touch her head before moving to other parts of her body to lick them. Immediately, she jerked up, screaming that she wasn't mentally prepared to do what he wanted. However, she realized that Naruyuki wasn't beside her, and that the stray cats were responsible for licking her body. On their way home later, Uruka wondered if Naruyuki wasn't attracted to her, because he was a rainbow ambassador. At the same time, Naruyuki couldn't stop staring at her plots, because they'd bounced with every step she took. When Uruka finally noticed his shameless gawking, she asked if he was thinking about making a sandwich with them. He told her he wasn't and said her exposed chest was a little bit distracting. Without looking at her, he awkwardly told her to only dress that way in front of the guy she liked, which made her happy. The next day, Naruyuki met Fumino behind the school to talk about his problems. Since Fumino considered herself Cupid's assistant, she gave him some advice. Naruyuki wrote them down in a small notebook and thanked her for the advice. He then told her he was going back to class, so she suggested that they walk back together. When she stood up, she tripped over her foot, and so Naruyuki quickly caught her before Floor-kun smashed her face in. Fumino thanked him, but was secretly glad that no one had been around to see what happened. As they stood together, Rizu approached them, causing Fumino to freak out. Naruyuki tried to talk to Rizu, but she just glared at them without saying a word, which led Fumino to believe she was angry at her. To make things worse, Rizu went to stand beside Naruyuki, and when he faced Fumino again, her glare was intact. Like all women do, Fumino jumped to the conclusion that Rizu was trying to stake her claim on Naruyuki. Hoping to appease Rizu and make it clear that she wanted nothing to do with her scrawny-ass man, Fumino instructed Naruyuki to take Rizu's hand and lead her inside. Naruyuki did as he was instructed, but as they walked through the hallway, people kept gawking at them like they were the originals. Later, Fumino came across Rizu and Naruyuki talking in the hallway, so she quickly hid behind a wall and observed them. She couldn't hear what they were saying but assumed it had something to do with what happened that morning. Since she still believed Rizu was angry about her hugging Naruyuki that morning, she decided to appease her with a hug. She approached them quietly and pushed Naruyuki towards Rizu, hoping it would result in a hug, but it didn't. Instead, Naruyuki fell headfirst into Rizu's large bosom, causing her to scream in surprise. After the fiasco, Rizu scolded both Naruyuki and Fumino before telling them that she was scowling that morning because she couldn't see them properly. She explained that her father accidentally stepped on her glasses the previous day, so she was using an older pair. The lens strength was off, so she had to squint to see where she was going. Fumino felt relieved that Rizu wasn't mad at her, but Rizu assured her that with the stunt she pulled earlier, she was most definitely mad at her. A few days later, Kurisu came across Naruyuki trying to save a cat from a tree. When the cat saw her, it became spooked and jumped out of the tree. Immediately, she dove to catch it, but accidentally landed on a rock and twisted her ankle. Naruyuki had to help her walk home, and after she closed her apartment door behind her, he heard a loud noise. Thinking she might have gotten hurt again, he rushed inside and was surprised to find her on the floor in her very messy apartment. Naruyuki couldn't believe she lived in such a pigsty and wondered what Captain Levi would say if he ever saw the place. After he helped her up, Kurisu changed clothes and then offered him a cup of coffee. As they drank their coffee, Kurisu suddenly told Naruyuki to take it out. Being the hot-blooded teenager that he was, he assumed she was referring to his dipstick, but she clarified that she was no Visoka and let him know she was talking about his books. Naruyuki did as she instructed, and for the next 2 hours, Kurisu helped him study. Soon after they concluded the study session, Naruyuki begged her to let him clean her apartment, and she agreed. As they were rounding up, Naruyuki found a trophy case with a picture of a younger Kurisu dressed as a figure skater. Naruyuki thought it was impressive, but Kurisu covered the case again and told her it wasn't. She said she regretted wasting her youth chasing such a meaningless dream and kept the trophies to remind herself never to make such a stupid mistake again. This made Naruyuki realize she was against Rizu and Fumino's career paths because she feared they would end up like her. However, he told her that as long as the girls kept working to achieve their goals, he would keep supporting them, which surprised her. The next day, Naruyuki told Fumino about his time at Sensei Kurisu's house. While he was speaking, Fumino heard Uruka and Rizu's voices, so she dragged him away to avoid being seen by the girls. At their new spot under a large tree, Fumino told Naruyuki that he couldn't tell anyone, especially Rizu and Uruka, about the time spent with Sensei Kurisu. Naruyuki didn't understand why but agreed to go along with it since he was sure it was for a good reason. Unknown to them, they were being watched by one of their classmates, who approached Fumino later with 2 other girls to ask if she was dating Naruyuki. Fumino denied it, but the girls weren't convinced and asked why she and Naruyuki were together under the famous couple's tree. Fumino tried to dispel the rumors before things got out of hand by saying Naruyuki was her tutor and nothing more, but it didn't work. The next moment, Naruyuki showed up, so the girls flocked to him and asked what kind of relationship he had with Fumino. Seeing as he never knew how to read a room, Naruyuki told the girls that his relationship with Fumino was special. Hearing this made the girls squeal in delight, much to Fumino's dismay. She once more attempted to explain that her relationship with Naruyuki was only platonic, but he kept messing things up. This time around, he picked up her bag and told her it was time for them to go since they had a lot to do. The girls were in awe as what they witnessed seemed to be more interesting than Love Island. Fumino was at her wit's end with Naruyuki, whose cluelessness was causing her more problems. At the library, Fumino kept a good distance between her and Naruyuki to avoid rumors, but their classmates were having none of that. One girl made her scoot closer to Fumino so she could get a spot at the table, and that was when Naruyuki finally noticed that the library was full. However, they were the only ones there to study, as all the others were on a covered operation. Their mission: determine if someone as mid and unflattering as Naruyuki was worthy of a princess like Fumino. Much to their disappointment, they observed that Fumino and Naruyuki didn't do anything out of the ordinary as they studied together. A few days later, Naruyuki showed the girls the new cell phone his mother won in a drawing contest. He explained that the whole family shared it, and it was finally his turn to use it, which he was excited about. The only problem was that he couldn't operate it even though he read the manual. The girls were surprised to see that the almighty Naruyuki was one of those still living in the Stone Age, so Uruka offered to show him the ropes. She showed him how to use the browser, and while she was at it, she came across an article that said studying in the bathtub increased effectiveness. Simultaneously, the 4 of them imagined themselves studying in the tub, but when Uruka said it was a dumb thing, they agreed. However, that night, Naruyuki studied in the tub and told himself it was the perfect place to study. When he encountered a word he didn't understand, he tried to look it up in his phone dictionary. Somehow, while searching for the dictionary, he sent Fumino a text and called both Uruka and Rizu. Coincidentally, Fumino and Rizu were also studying in the bathtub, but Uruka was just showering. His conversation with each girl was awkward, but his discussion with Uruka took the cake. You see, the feather-brained girl tried to turn on her speaker but accidentally switched to a video call. As soon as Naruyuki realized that Uruka had accidentally started an OnlyFans live stream, he tried to get her to turn off her camera. Uruka didn't hear him because she was washing her hair and had her eyes closed, so it wasn't until she rinsed the soap out of her eyes that she discovered what was going on. Immediately, she screamed and called Naruyuki a shameless degenerate, since she could also see what he was packing. Embarrassed, Naruyuki panicked and accidentally dropped his phone in the tub, thus ending the call. The next day, Uruka refused to look at Naruyuki because she was still embarrassed, but Naruyuki didn't notice since he was down in the dumps about his phone getting submerged in the water. A few days later, Uruka finished her assignments quickly, and after Naruyuki confirmed that she got it right, she left for practice. After her practice, she took a shower with her teammates and they advised her to slow down. They pointed out that she would fall sick if she didn't take things easy. Uruka told them not to worry as she was slowly finding the balance between swimming and studying. By the time she got home that evening, she was exhausted, so she fell in her bed. However, when she remembered how Naruyuki praised her earlier, she decided to study. The next day, Uruka went to school looking tired since she stayed up late studying. She collapsed when Naruyuki approached her to ask how her practice had gone. Immediately, he rushed her to the infirmary, and as he sat beside her, she surprised him by pulling him in for a hug. Shocked, Naruyuki remained frozen, but suddenly the door opened and Uruka's friends rushed into the room. Without thinking, he hid underneath her bed to avoid being seen by the girls, even though he'd done nothing wrong. While there, he overheard one of the girls say that Uruka had a crush on him. Naruyuki was surprised as he'd never imagined that anyone would like a worthless nobody like him. After the girls left, he crawled out from underneath the bed and stared at Uruka differently. The next day, as Uruka and Naruyuki walked home after school, Uruka thanked Naruyuki for taking her to the infirmary when she passed out. He told her it wasn't a big deal, but she insisted it was and said she would take him somewhere to thank him properly. Since Naruyuki was in the running for the dumbest character of the year, he assumed she wanted them to go to a love motel. However, she proved she wasn't as dirty-minded as he was by taking him to a ramen place. After their meal, they continued on their way home. And as they walked, Uruka asked Naruyuki if he had someone he liked. He told her he didn't because he wanted to focus all his attention on his studies. His answer made Uruka smile, and when he saw this, he asked if he was the guy she liked. Uruka started laughing and told him not to get ahead of himself because she wouldn't date him even if she were paid $100 million. Naruyuki felt embarrassed but relieved that the matter had been settled. Later, while Uruka soaked in the bathtub, she called herself an idiot for lying to Naruyuki. However, she knew it was for the best. The next day, Naruyuki was on his way to the library when Kurisu dragged him to her apartment to help her get rid of a cockroach. When the cockroach crawled out from behind the television, Kurisu shrieked like a banshee and jumped on Naruyuki. As much as he enjoyed the feeling of her watermelons against his face, he knew it wasn't the time to dwell on such thoughts. He asked her to let go so he could take care of the cockroach, but Kurisu refused, allowing the cockroach to crawl to safety. An hour later, Naruyuki finished cleaning Kurisu's apartment and tried to leave, but she begged him to stay. She promised she would do anything he wanted if he stayed for a while to protect her from the cockroach. Naruyuki took her offer and asked her to help him study until night fell and his stomach cried for food. Kurisu invited him to stay for dinner since she had already ordered something. When she made the offer, the doorbell rang, so she asked Naruyuki to answer the door. He did as she asked, and when he opened the door, he was surprised to see that the delivery person was Rizu. Naruyuki knew he was in deep shit because Rizu's face wasn't one of joy, and as if that wasn't bad enough, she joined them for dinner. While they ate, both females tried to intimidate each other, forcing Naruyuki into an awkward position. He understood it was because Rizu assumed he was Kurisu's sugar baby and decided to explain everything. However, Kurisu subtly shook her head to tell him not to say anything, so he proposed they play Rizu's card games to ease some of the tension in the room. Unfortunately, it had the opposite effect because Rizu lost all the games, and in her usual manner, Kurisu made snide comments which made Rizu upset. When Kurisu left to get them coffee, Naruyuki told Rizu not to take Kurisu's words to heart and explained that she had her reasons for being that way. He tried to make her see that Kurisu was warm and caring, but that made Rizu angry because she recalled how Kurisu always harshly told her to give up on her dreams. As far as she was concerned, the woman didn't have a single nice bone in her body. Suddenly, they heard Kurisu scream and rush to the kitchen to see if she was being hacked to death by a masked murderer. However, what happened was that Kurisu had spotted the cockroach again, and when Naruyuki opened the door, she lunged at him. Rizu came in at that moment and sarcastically told Naruyuki that she finally understood why he claimed Kurisu was warm and caring when she saw their position. When Kurisu screamed again, Rizu noticed the cockroach, so she smashed it with a rolled newspaper. A little while later, Rizu and Naruyuki left Kurisu's place, and as they walked to her house, Rizu thanked Naruyuki for making her understand that her old tutor wasn't the evil witch she thought she was. A few days later, Naruyuki's mother fell sick, so he offered to take her shift since he was a good kid. When he arrived at the mall, he was shocked to discover that his mother worked at a lingerie store. While speaking to the manager, he admitted that he would feel awkward working at the store, but she assured him that he had nothing to worry about since most of their customers were elderly women. Still, Naruyuki felt embarrassed, so she made him dress up as the store's mascot, because that way no one would recognize him. Naruyuki liked this idea even less since he was forced to breathe in his putrid man odor for the next few hours. If that wasn't bad enough, the manager left him in charge of the store because she got a call that her daughter was sick. As luck would have it, Uruka and Rizu walked into the store the next moment. Upon seeing them, Naruyuki decided to leave the store, but Uruka stopped him, requesting that he measure Rizu's cup size. Naruyuki freaked out after hearing Uruka's request and decided it was best to take off his costume, but he was unable to reach the zipper. Clueless as always, Uruka assumed Naruyuki was hesitating because he was a new employee, so she offered to help him take Rizu's measurements. Under her guidance, Naruyuki took Rizu's measurements against his better judgment, and when he was done, Uruka asked him to pick between the two bras she was holding. Images of Uruka posing in the complete underwear set suddenly appeared in Naruyuki's head, and if he wasn't wearing the costume, Uruka might have seen just how excited he was to see them. He managed to push those images aside and pointed at one of the bras. Rizu also picked one for herself, and after making their purchase, they left the store. Thinking he was finally out of the woods, Naruyuki tried to relax, but Kurisu's head suddenly popped out from one of the dressing rooms as she asked for his assistance. Naruyuki freaked out when he realized that the assistance she wanted involved unhooking the bra she had on. He attempted to stop gawking at her, but Kurisu pulled him into the dressing room and moved her hair aside to let him do his job. Since he'd never had a girlfriend, he'd never gotten to second base, so he had zero experience with unhooking bras. Because he was taking too long to unhook her, Kurisu assumed she'd broken the clasp while trying to put the bra on earlier, but Naruyuki finally unhooked it. The only downside was that when she turned to thank him, the bra slipped off, exposing her tatas to him. It took him a while to recover from the shock of what he saw, but he did and thanked the Lord that he was finally alone. However, the odds weren't in his favor because Fumino showed up looking like a lost little mouse as she stepped into the store. Apparently, she had turned down Uruka and Rizu's invitation to go underwear shopping because she was self-conscious about the knick-knack racks. Without wasting time, she selected a few A-cup bras and went to try them on in the dressing room. Just then, the manager returned, and as she helped Naruyuki unzip his costume, Fumino re-emerged from the dressing room and went into shock when she saw that Naruyuki was the one inside the costume. A few weeks later, the summer holidays began, and instead of enjoying it like a normal teenager, Naruyuki attended summer classes. On his first day, he met a girl, who he mistook for a middle schooler because of her flat chest and smallish stature. The girl sat beside him in class, and Naruyuki kept staring at her like she was Jennifer Love's, so she asked what he wanted. He'd apologized for acting like a creep, and then asked why she was in a class for high schoolers. The girl looked at him like he was an idiot, which wasn't far from the truth, and said she was a former student at his high school. She even showed him her ID to prove that she was older than him, and that was how he learned that her name was Asumi. It so happened that Asumi had failed her first entrance exam and was attending the prep school in preparation to take another one. Naruyuki then apologized for making assumptions, and Asumi told him never to disrespect her again. Once classes were over for the day, Naruyuki started walking to the train station, but since he was unfamiliar with the area, he got lost. While trying to bring out his inner Nami and navigate through the place, he was approached by two scary-looking dudes. The sus men told him that they were going to take him somewhere, which made him scared. However, he was surprised when they took him to a fancy-made cafe instead of the dimly lit, gangster hangout he'd imagined. He was thankful they meant no harm but tried to run away from the shop, because he was too broke to afford their services. On his way out, he bumped into Asumi, who happened to work there as a maid. Both were surprised to see the other there, but Asumi agreed to sit and talk with him even though she tried to act annoyed. Her co-workers let him know that Asumi was working there to save money so she could pay for prep school and medical school. Surprisingly, the scary-looking guys weren't so scary when Asumi scolded them for bringing Naruyuki to the cafe when they knew he was as broke as Shintoki. After they apologized to Naruyuki, an embarrassing Captain Obvious pointed out that they respected her. Asumi said it was because she'd worked at the cafe longer than they have, and added that because of that they let her study there whenever they didn't have customers. After saying all that, she told Naruyuki to leave since his face was starting to annoy her. When he stood up, he bumped into the table, causing Asumi's books and papers to fall, so he bent to pick them up. Asumi tried to stop him, but it was too late, as he had already seen her test scores, which were all very poor. Ashamed, she admitted she was bad at science, and said if he wanted to laugh at her, he could go ahead. Instead of doing that, Naruyuki offered to tutor her, and when he was done, she thanked him. The following day, much to Asumi's surprise, Naruyuki returned to the cafe. When she began questioning why he was there, her co-workers admitted that they had begged him to return and tutor her. Asumi scolded them for making that decision for her and even protested against getting tutored by Naruyuki, but in the end, she changed her mind. From that day, Naruyuki came to the cafe to tutor Asumi until the cave got busy and he had to leave. On one particular day, Naruyuki bumped into a man after leaving Asumi's workplace. He quickly apologized and the man told him it was okay, since he also shared some of the blame for not watching where he was going. When the man picked up the book Naruyuki had been holding, he mentioned that it was from the same prep school his daughter attended. Just then, Asumi came running towards them with Naruyuki's train pass, which he'd forgotten at the cafe. As soon as the man saw her, he called her name and asked why she was dressed as a maid. It so happened that the man was her father, and he wasn't happy to see her dressed like that. They then went to Asumi's house, which also happened to be her father's clinic, and while there, the old man scolded his daughter for doing shady jobs to make money. Asumi told him she was dressed that way because her boyfriend Naruyuki was a kinky-ass freak who had a maid fetish. Naruyuki tried to deny it, but Asumi gave him a signal, begging him to go along with her ruse, so he kept quiet. Her father then asked what made him attracted to her, and he said it was her dedication to get into medical school. After hearing this, the old man asked Asumi why she was still holding on to her ridiculous dream of becoming a doctor. Asumi argued that it wasn't ridiculous and asked him to stop telling her to let it go because she wasn't Elsa. The two kept arguing for a while, and when they finally stopped, Naruyuki spoke up and told Asumi's father that he was convinced she could pass the exams. He said he was willing to help her in every way that he could, and asked her father to have a little faith in her. Days later, Naruyuki and Asumi met Rizu and the others outside their prep school. Apparently, they had decided to sign up for summer lessons since they didn't want to overburden Naruyuki. Later, while he was explaining his relationship with the girls to Asumi, the girls showed up at his class one after the other to complain about how hard it was for them to keep up with their teachers. During their lunch break, Asumi gave them a few pointers on how to keep up with their teachers and understand their courses. This made the girls look at her with admiration, something Asumi wasn't used to. Later, after classes were over, Asumi was just about to leave Naruyuki and the girls when it began raining cats and dogs. Since her house was closer, they all went there to dry off and wait out the rain. While they were in Asumi's bedroom, Naruyuki noticed that the girls' clothes were super wet and that their bras were showing. He tried to ignore it, but when he realized Uruka was wearing the bra he selected, he freaked out. Uruka also freaked out, but for a different reason, and ended up calling Naruyuki a cultured brat for staring at her chest. Later, when Fumino went to return the towels they used to Asumi's father, he asked who Naruyuki was to her and the others. Naruyuki said he was their tutor, and the man told her he was glad that his daughter's first boyfriend was a responsible young man. Hearing this shocked Fumino, so she called Naruyuki out into the hallway and grilled him about his relationship. Naruyuki told her that it was a lie, and Asumi, who suddenly showed up, explained why they had to lie. Fumino accepted the explanation but asked Asumi if she was sure she didn't have feelings for Naruyuki. Asumi said she was sure and then teased Fumino about having a secret crush on Naruyuki. Fumino firmly told her that she didn't, saying Asumi's crush radar was way off. 2 nights later, Sensei Kurisu went out with her co-workers. However, when they proposed that they go for more drinks, she opted out and left. On her way home, she spotted Naruyuki about to enter the maid cafe, so she stopped him. Just as she was lecturing about visiting shady places like that, Asumi showed up. From the looks of things, Kurisu and Asumi had some sort of teacher-student relationship that went sour while Asumi was still in high school. After they went inside the cafe, Asumi and Kurisu got into an argument about whether or not Naruyuki ought to be there. Eventually, the argument led to a tug-of-war, and poor Naruyuki served as their rope. When Asumi pointed out that Kurisu's concern for Naruyuki was kind of suspicious, the woman released her grip. This caused her to fall and crash into one of the other maids. The maid ended up with a sprained ankle, which meant that the cafe would be short-staffed, so Asumi put Kurisu to work. Naruyuki tried to dissuade Kurisu from doing the job, but she insisted that it was the only way to make up for the trouble she caused. Asumi then made her practice her introductions with Naruyuki, which she didn't like. However, she pushed her embarrassment aside and shyly did the introduction. Her puteness made Naruyuki's brain overload and caused his sleeping worm to stir. Kurisu was so embarrassed, and even more so when Asumi revealed that she wasn't going to interact with the customers because she was on cleaning duty. After Asumi handed the cleaning supplies to Kurisu, Naruyuki asked her if she was sure she could do the job. Kurisu told him not to underestimate her, but as soon as she went out to clean, she tripped and fell, which led to her getting wet. To Naruyuki's surprise, the bald guys who brought him to the cafe shed a few tears and said they were glad they finally got a clumsy maid. Ignoring them, Naruyuki told Kurisu and Asumi that he would take over Kurisu's duties and began mopping the floor. Kurisu told him to leave it, but he said it was only right for people to receive help when they needed this. As she watched him mop, she recalled how the girls had come to his defense in the past and wondered if his kindness was the reason for it. Hours later, after the cafe was closed, the workers and Naruyuki stayed back to celebrate their successful workday. Kurisu was the only one not in a celebratory mood because she felt like a failure for not doing her work properly. When Asumi began to tease her about being a klutz, Kurisu snapped out of her depressed mood and asked her if she still hoped to become a doctor. Asumi told her yes, and said she didn't give a flying flip if Kurisu was still against her decision because she wasn't going to change her mind. It so happened that while Asumi was still in high school, Kurisu told her not to waste her time trying to become a doctor. However, her disapproval only made Asumi more determined to fulfill her dream because she wanted to prove Kurisu wrong. While Asumi was still explaining her past to Naruyuki, Kurisu suddenly passed out after taking a sip of her drink, which happened to be alcoholic. Having no choice, Naruyuki piggybacked the lightweight to her apartment. On the way there, the intoxicated Kurisu surprised Naruyuki by patting his head and telling him what a wonderful person he was. Before she drifted off to slumberland, she said she was proud of the girls for putting in the work to achieve their goals. The following day, after Kurisu took a shower, she realized that she had nothing to wear. She had to go pick up some documents, but her suits were at the dry cleaners, and none of her tracksuits were dry yet. Left with no other alternative, she decided to wear her old high school uniform and opted to take her car so no one would see her. However, before she can pull out of the parking lot, a police officer knocks on her window. He asked her to show him her license, and once he confirmed she was an adult, he began questioning her choice of clothing. Kurisu was so mortified that she didn't say a word, but Naruyuki suddenly showed up and told the man that Kurisu was his drama club advisor. He said she was dressed that way because of the role she was playing in their upcoming drama. The man believed what he said, and after he left, Naruyuki correctly guessed that Kurisu was dressed like that because she had no clean clothes to wear. Thankfully that he understood her plight, Kurisu offered Naruyuki a ride to school since he also had something to do there. However, she drove fast and furious like Dominic Toretto, causing Naruyuki to hold on for his life. After they arrived at school, Kurisu went to collect the documents she needed. Once she had them, Naruyuki escorted her back to her car, ensuring that she wasn't seen by any of the other students. When she attempted to start her, she realized she had run out of gas, so they walked back to her apartment together. Kurisu was so nervous on the way, so Naruyuki bought her an ice cream cone. As they sat on a bench to enjoy their ice cream, Rizu and Fumino showed up at the ice cream shop. Quickly, they hid behind some bushes to avoid being seen, but the girls chose to sit on the bench closest to their hiding spot. To make things worse, Naruyuki's ice cream dripped on Kurisu's neck, which made her yelp in surprise. The sound drew the girls' attention, but when Fumino turned to look, she saw them kissing. Worried that she was intruding on a couple's privacy, she told Rizu they had to leave. Once they were gone, Naruyuki and Kurisu, who were only pretending to kiss, separated and continued on their way to Kurisu's apartment. A few days later, Naruyuki and Uruka had an awkward study session in one of the empty classes at the prep school. This bothered Naruyuki, so he spoke to Fumino about it when they went out for ramen. He pretended that it was his friend who had the issue, but Fumino already knew he was talking about himself and Uruka. He told her about the time he asked Uruka if he was her crush and she denied it. Fumino was surprised he was ballsy enough to do that, but didn't voice her opinion about it. Later that afternoon, Fumino met Uruka at another ramen shop and Uruka told her the same time Naruyuki told her earlier. After listening to all Uruka had to say, Fumino advised her not to avoid Naruyuki and to talk things out with him in a calm environment. Following that advice, Uruka invited Naruyuki to a park the next day, but the two were still awkward with each other. Unable to hold a normal conversation, both Uruka and Naruyuki simultaneously sent Fumino an SOS text. Unknown to them, Fumino was sitting on the bench behind them because she wanted to see how things went. She texted back, suggesting that they talk about a mutual friend, as that was a good conversation starter. Taking her advice, Uruka began talking about Asumi and how she'd been surprised to learn that her father was a doctor. Naruyuki got sucked into the conversation and then mentioned the time they got caught in the rain and had to go to Asumi's place to dry off. This then led to the topic of their wet shirts, and when Uruka asked Naruyuki if he'd seen their bras, Fumino let out a shriek. The sound of her voice made her friends turn around, but when they noticed the person sitting behind them had a bigger pair of racks than Fumino, they agreed she wasn't the one. Fumino was relieved her disguise had worked but annoyed that her flat chest was her signature look. She soon noticed that Uruka and Naruyuki weren't speaking anymore, and the next moment, she received text messages from them asking for conversation topics. Deciding to get serious, she suggested a few topics that both of them could relate to. Each new conversation made them recall an awkward incident that happened between them, like the time she accidentally gave him her swimsuit instead of the pencil case she bought. The other one was the time they visited the shrine and Uruka pretended to sleep while hoping Naruyuki would make a move on her. After the conversation died again, Fumino texted Uruka, asking if her friend wanted her crush to like her back. Uruka replied with a yes and added a few other things her friend wished her crush would do with her. Before Fumino could reply to her text, Sekiho texted her asking what hairstyle she thought Rizu would prefer on her. Fumino couldn't believe the girl was bothering her with such nonsense and decided to ignore her message. However, since she was distracted, she accidentally sent the response she was supposed to Uruka to Sekiho. When she realized her mistake, she tried to delete the message but stopped when she heard Naruyuki compliment Uruka's hairstyle. The compliment was what broke the ice, and the two began conversing like they used to before feelings became involved. Days later, Naruyuki attended the swimming club's swim meet. Uruka won the 200-meter freestyle, but the team was disqualified in the relay because one of the girls had a false start. The girl felt bad about it and blamed herself for their loss, but her teammates assured her that it wasn't her fault. Later, as Naruyuki and Uruka walked home, Uruka admitted that she was sad that they had lost the relay, but said that they would learn from their mistakes and do better next time. She then asked Naruyuki to hang out with her for a little while longer, and he agreed, so they went to their middle school. They walked around the school, reminiscing about the time they spent there before going to the swimming pool. There they talked about how Uruka almost quit swimming because she had lost a swimming tournament in grade school. Uruka told Naruyuki he had been the one who convinced her not to quit, but it seemed his 500-megabyte processor brain had tossed out the memory to make room for more important things. Naruyuki then changed the topic and asked Uruka if she had confessed her feelings to her crush yet. The question caused Uruka to get flustered, but she admitted she wasn't courageous enough to confess. Hoping to help her, Naruyuki proposed that she practice by confessing to him. Uruka couldn't believe the dumb idiot would suggest such a thing and told him that if he called her by her first name she would consider it. Naruyuki did this easily, which left her feeling self-conscious, as she'd always had trouble doing it for him. After remembering all the times she'd practiced how she would confess to him, Uruka gathered courage and finally confessed to Nariyuki. However, our stupid MC assumed she was practicing like he told her to, and told her to redo it because she had made a mistake by saying his name. Annoyed, Uruka pushed him into the pool, but he grabbed her hand at the last minute, and they both fell in together. When Nariyuki re-emerged, he called Uruka by her surname, and she told him that she thought he'd start calling her by her first name instead. Without thinking, Nariyuki called her by her first name, causing her to get flustered and sink back into the water. A few days later, Nariyuki bumped into Fumino and Uruka at the summer festival, and since he was there with his family, he introduced the girls to them. Uruka was a bit nervous, but Fumino pushed her towards Nariyuki and asked if he thought they looked nice in their yukatas. Nariyuki complimented them, which made Uruka happy as she liked that he thought she was beautiful. Nariyuki's mother sensed that something was going on, so asked him to go ahead and enjoy the festival with the girls. Hoping to play matchmaker, Fumino claimed she had to go somewhere, and then left Nariyuki and Uruka alone. As the two walked around the festival, they came across Rizu and her father at their food stall, which had a lot of customers, and decided to help them. Uruka stayed behind to help Rizu's father with the stall, while Nariyuki went with Rizu to make deliveries. When they finally finished with their deliveries, Rizu returned to the food stall, leaving Nariyuki alone. As he wondered what to do, he noticed a crowd gathered around a shooting booth where a masked woman was shooting down all the targets. Despite her disguise, Nariyuki recognized the masked woman as Kurisu, and when he approached her, she tried to flee but tripped and fell on the staircase. Since she got injured, Nariyuki gave her a piggyback ride to the medical station. There they met Asumi and her father, but none of them could attend to Kurisu because they had a lot of patients. Asumi told, or rather, ordered Nariyuki to clean Kurisu's wound, so he made her sit down and bought out the disinfectant. Kurisu's yukata had a slit, so Nariyuki willed himself not to look at her exposed thighs as he administered the first aid. To make things worse, Kurisu kept making sounds that sounded a lot like happy noises. A while later, Fumino, who had been stargazing since she ditched her friends, realized it was late, and she would miss her train if she didn't leave immediately. On her way to the station, she ran into a little girl who was crying because she'd gotten separated from her mom. Almost at the same time, Nariyuki left the medical station and ran into another little girl who was crying because she couldn't find her mother and sister. Even though he knew he could miss his train, he helped the little girl reunite with her mother and sister. The girl's sister happened to be the girl Fumino helped, and when she pointed in at where Nariyuki was standing, she saw that he'd already left for the train station. Unfortunately, he arrived late and missed the train, but was surprised to see that he wasn't the only one when Fumino approached him. They tried to eat a taxi by walking to the main road, but the streets were deserted, so Fumino suggested they spend the night at an inn. At the inn, the innkeeper informed them that there was only one room available, so Fumino convinced her to give them the room by claiming they were siblings. When they got to the room and discovered it had only one futon, things between them got awkward. Nariyuki asked Fumino to take the futon, but she refused and insisted that he take it. In the end, they decided to share but felt uncomfortable as their bodies kept rubbing against each other. Eventually, Nariyuki gave up on the idea of sleep and put his glasses back on, but his attention was drawn to the window. He quickly asked Fumino to do the same, and when she did, she was surprised to see that the sky was filled with stars. As they gazed at the stars together, Fumino pointed out the stars she recognized, and then told him a story her mom used to tell her when she was still alive. This made Nariyuki tell her that he admired her for having a dream she wanted to chase, unlike him who didn't have one. Fumino told him that when the day came that he found something he wanted to do, she would support him. As he thought about what she said, he noticed she'd fallen asleep while holding onto his hand. Sometime during the night, Fumino awoke from a dream about her mother and saw that Nariyuki was holding her hand firmly in his sleep. This made her blush, but instead of pulling away, she snuggled closer to him. The next morning on the train ride home, Nariyuki and Fumino kept their distance from one another as they were embarrassed that they woke up in each other's arms. That's all for today, guys. If you want to find out if Nariyuki and Uruka become a couple, let us know by commenting apple juice. Also, if you enjoyed this recap, check out this video over here.